Hello, everybody. So today I wanted to do a book review about an amazing book I've just finished reading. It is, of course, David Copperfield by the great Charles Dickens, one of his most famous books, and also famous for being the most self-autobiographical of Dickens' works. Um, I absolutely loved it. And on the back of the book is a blurb from Leo Tolstoy of War and Peace fame, the great Russian novelist. It says, "The greatest achievement of the greatest of all novelists." That's what Leo had to say about it. And you know what? It's difficult to argue. So, David Copperfield is a book written in the first person from the perspective of David Copperfield about his life from his early childhood days through to adulthood. It is quite long, almost 900 pages, but it was released over an 18-month period. Originally, every month there'd be a periodical that would come out with 3 to 4 chapters, and usually a cliffhanger at the end of it. So the book throughout is quite engaging and doesn't really get boring very much in times. It's easy to read. There are also in times it gets a little bit old school with the Victorian language, but overall the themes and ideas of this book are very modern and still relevant to today's age. Dickens, above all other things, is a timeless writer. That's what makes him so great, and his work doesn't really age as far as I'm concerned. Another reason to read David Copperfield, a shout out to my ENFP peeps out there. ENFP, of course, is my personality type. It was also very much categorically, undeniably, the personality type of Charles Dickens and David Copperfield himself. So if you want to read a book where the main character is an ENFP, this is the book for you. So I wanted to talk about 6 elements or facets of the book that stood out for me. The first one, which I thought was strongest, and I loved the book for it, was the air of sentimentality that permeates the whole book. I'm not talking about it being a love story. There are love stories within the book, but I'm talking about the fact that, but it's not a romance per se. I'm talking about the fact that Dickens's style throughout the book is sentimental, romantic, idealistic, very ENFP, in fact. Um, and I loved it. Yeah, he knows how to move you emotionally. He knows how to engage you, tug on your heartstrings. I'm not too ashamed to admit that 2 or 3 times in the book it moved me to tears, which doesn't happen often, either tears of joy or tears of sadness. But there are not many authors who can move you so much emotionally in the skillful way that Dickens does. So if you like that kind of stuff, I definitely recommend the book. Secondly, common to many of Dickens's books is his commentary on social issues of the time. The first half of this book is written from the point of view of David as a child, and so there's a lot of commentary on the inadequacy of the education system, which maybe hasn't changed so much, and the shocking child labour laws, or rather the lack of labour laws, which is an area that has changed, of course. Also, most memorably, Dickens pokes fun, of course, as he always does, at the legal system, which I think he does a lot of in his books. It's like an ongoing crusade or an on-running gag, and I think Dickens sees the legal system as the source of a lot of injustice, ironically enough, throughout society. Much the way that I'd see the banking system to be that today. But back in the 1800s, I guess the banking system hadn't really taken off, so it was the legal system that was the big bugbear that caused lots of issues in society. Then the other thing that is ongoing throughout this book is the humour and the comedy. I wouldn't call this a comedy per se, like Pickwick Papers, but there's some very memorable characters and humorous lines in the book. And I think to get an idea of that, please check out the link that I've put in the description. I've linked it to a trailer of the new David Copperfield movie that's just come out. And as you can see, it is absolutely hilarious. So yeah, some very funny characters, which takes me on to the characters in the book. Dickens is well known for his wonderful, memorable character work, and there are an abundance of memorable original characters in this book. 2 of them I'd heard of before. One is the very famous Mr Micawber, one of Dickens's most famous characters, and he's most well known, Mr Micawber, for his pronouncements and his wisdom and insight into all matters financial, which is all the more ironic when you learn that he's absolutely hopeless in practice with all things financial. But I've put a quote in the description, which is wonderful advice for any, even for the modern age. Then there's Uriah Heep, who's this very memorable original villain. When I read about Uriah Heep, I think about Gollum or Smeagol from Lord of the Rings. Uriah Heep is basically a human personification of Gollum, the villain-like goblin, my precious. And I wouldn't be surprised if Tolkien took inspiration for Gollum from Uriah Heep when he wrote Lord of the Rings 100 years later. Then my favourite character of all was Betsy Trotwood, who's this wonderful, eccentric, strong, opinionated English gentlewoman. I think Dickens has a thing for eccentric females. Look at Miss Havisham in Great Expectations. But the wonderful thing about Miss Trotwood is that she's highly amusing and entertaining throughout the book, and for her alone, it's worth reading this book, I believe. Then there's some psychology in this book. There's not a whole lot, but at certain times, uh, Dickens suddenly gets very very deep, particularly in his analysis of some of the characters in the book, and so this manifested itself, for example, through David's observations and analysis of some of the villains in the book. There are two or three villains in the book. David himself is not very consistent. He's very judgmental and very biased, as are all human beings. And he sees and perceives and talks about these villains, I think, quite inconsistently and in contradictory terms, and gets quite deep about it, which I think is interesting. None of Dickens' characters are always very rich and flawed. They're not black and white characters, but they're very interesting and original, and they act unpredictably, which I think is very much like real human nature. So that's another great element of his book. And finally, on the psychology, Dickens and his characters have a lot to say, a lot of insightful wisdom, I think, about romantic love. And that had such an impact on me that I want to do a separate video all about David Copperfield and love. So hopefully you enjoyed this one enough to want to join me in that one. See you there.